As we return to ordinary time today, we pick up the Gospel of Luke. In the passage that we would have heard last Sunday, Jesus made it clear what it means to follow him. If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it. And for those who lose their life for my sake will save it. In today's gospel, Jesus sets his face toward Jerusalem. The road will be a long one. In Luke's gospel, Jesus travels the road to Jerusalem for 10 long chapters, much longer than in any other gospel. So we'll be following Jesus along the road from now until almost the beginning of Advent. Jesus began his ministry in Galilee, and it ended in Jerusalem with his crucifixion. Father Ron Rolheiser suggests that these are places of the heart. Galilee is the place of birth, the beginning, falling in love, the honeymoon, where everything went right, where all the miracles took place. Jerusalem is where everything went wrong. It was the place of crucifixion, humiliation, the place where it all collapses. In Jerusalem, the Lord sweats blood in agony. In the early part of our spiritual journey, we look for Christ in Galilee, in spiritual highs and attending great conferences. But the deeper we go on our journey, the more likely we'll encounter a dark night of the soul, a time of desolation, where we seem to experience a deep privation of God. And this explains why Jesus almost seems to push the prospective disciples away. If we're going to follow Jesus to Jerusalem, what happened to Jesus will happen to us. The Spanish mystic John of the Cross said, quote, "We imitate Jesus when we try to imitate his motivation, when we try to do things for the same reason that he did." For John of the Cross, that's how one puts on Christ. We enter real discipleship when, like Jesus, we have as our motivation the desire to draw all things into one unity of heart, one family of love. When the Samaritans reject Jesus because he's on his way to Jerusalem, James and John do their best to channel the prophet Elijah, who rained down fire from heaven on the Samaritan king Ahaziah. But instead of rebuking the Samaritans, Jesus turned and rebuked them. Following Jesus means that we are being led to a place where we could not go on our own. Jesus comes not to exclude, but to gather. As Jesus says in Luke chapter 19, "For the Son of Man came to seek out and save the lost." Our resistance to Jesus' mission to the lost is captured beautifully in this meme of the shepherd who returns carrying the lost sheep over his shoulder, and one of the lambs shouts, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, hold it right there. He wasn't lost. We kicked him out." Our final stop on our trip to France was Paray-le-Monial, the town where devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus began with Saint Margaret Mary Alacoque, a visitation sister in the convent at Paray-le-Monial. This past Friday, we celebrated the feast of the Most Sacred Heart of Jesus, which is celebrated on a Friday 19 days after Pentecost. The first Friday devotions come from this feast. Sister Margaret Mary was having visions of the Sacred Heart between 1673 and 1675. But her community of nuns was not too happy with her. In fact, some of them thought that she was deluded and arrogant. She won herself no friends when, after a vision in 1677, she announced to the convent that Jesus had asked her to be willing to suffer in order to expiate the shortcomings of her sisters. But Jesus told her that he would send her a friend who would support her and help spread devotion to the Sacred Heart. And soon after, a certain Jesuit, Claude de Colombières, arrived as her confessor. He apparently did not get the same memo. Sister Margaret Mary was quite upset when Claude Colombières steadfastly refused to acknowledge her visions as genuine, although he questioned her ceaselessly about them. Finally, Claude Colombières devised a way to find out if these were really visions of God. The next time Jesus appeared, Margaret Mary was to ask him a question and relay the answer immediately to Claude Colombières. And the question was one that only God would know the answer to. What was Claude Colombières' last mortal sin? Well, after another vision, Claude was impatient to question her on Jesus' response. Well, he prodded, did Jesus tell you my last mortal sin? Margaret Mary looked at him and replied, the Sacred Heart said, tell him I can't remember. I always forget. And in that instant, Claude de Colombières knew that she was indeed seeing and listening to Jesus. The opening prayer from the Mass of the Most Sacred Heart of Jesus, I think, is the perfect prayer for any of us who have answered the call to follow Jesus. God of love, you set your heart upon the least of nations, and in the heart of Jesus, you reveal your love to the merest of children. Make us simple enough to receive your great love and strong enough to bear it to others.